It's already set me a great chance to say to me I can't take longer than 10 to 15 minutes, which is impossible for me because it takes a long time to talk about all the great stuff I can share. So this is really all about telling you some of our experiences. I am the director of the School of IT, which is a great initiative at UCT, where we're basically on the computer science and IS space. And I also run a research team called ICOMS, and all of our work has been in the water and sanitation sector and in developing technology for the water and sanitation sector. So we work in what we call ICT4D. ICT4D stands for ICT for Development, Information Communication Technologies for Development. And it's one of the sectors that's growing, and we're basically trying to use technologies to make the world a better place. And the world a better place is sometimes quite difficult because who defines it, what defines a better world? And one of the reasons why this field grew so incredibly was because of the mobile phone. The mobile phone became available, everybody had a mobile phone, so we really thought the mobile phone was one of the ways to really change the world and change behavior and also change the experience of people in the world. And so we got a constitution. I don't know if you've ever seen the Millennium Development Goals. They're nice and colorful, they're actually not nice and colorful. If you look at them in detail, we have set ourselves very steep goals by 2030, but ICTs and technologies are in it, and we have to do a lot of work. The SDGs are the follow-on of the MDGs, so abbreviations seem to make things feel better, but it's actually quite a high target to set ourselves. And the situation that the City of Cape Town experiences is right in the middle of it. It's not something we didn't think about, it's not something nobody knew, and it's not something that came as a surprise. So anybody who says this is a big surprise, actually it wasn't. And we all knew that it would hit us at some stage. So the WASH sector is what you actually all experience. It's the water and sanitation hygiene. That's what the World Health Organization calls it, and they've been working in the sector for a very long time. Water and sanitation and hygiene go together because education about water and sanitation is important in order to grapple with the problems we were facing. Let's recycle grey water. That's actually not so funny when we start getting pathogens and everybody gets diarrhea. We still have 1.3 million children dying annually because of waterborne diseases. We have managed to get rid of cholera. That's very quickly to come back if everybody starts becoming a great rainwater harvester. So there is quite a lot of challenges because there are some things that actually aren't that easy with doing all these great things. So one of the things that we felt is in the beginning, if we use ICTs in the water sector to get more data, to get better information, we would be able to change the world. And so we looked at this as a low-hanging fruit. We realized then that it was a lot more complex and a lot more complicated than anticipated. And if you do any research in the sector, you will find that pilotitis is the name of the game. Pilotitis is everybody has had a great idea, but nobody wanted it. So we have lots of pilot studies. The whole of Africa is littered with pilot studies. Most of them come with very good intentions from phenomenal people all over the world who really want to make a difference. They have solved the problems in their world, so now why not save Africa? And if you want to get into a sector that's phenomenal with politics, you think we're having a problem in Cape Town, try the water sector in Africa. There's everything from politicians to NGOs to governments. Everybody's there and has a game plan. So if you haven't taken the course Politics 101 at UCT, you're actually in for a very hard ride. And so I think that's quite an interesting thing because it's all about politics. So don't expect that you develop a system without facing that issue. So we worked in water, and one of the things we worked in was a really great opportunity. We were funded by one of the great tech developers, the Gates Foundation, and we were given the opportunity to say, let's develop an app for the world to improve water data collection. So it was all about getting water from rural areas, getting it tested, and sending the information to a central database so that the decision makers could make better decisions in order to help people in rural areas to have safer water supplies. One of the interesting things is you need to educate people that in actual fact Africa isn't a country. That's quite a challenge in itself because people have this experience we're going to solve the world's problem in Africa by giving them a solution, giving them an app. And then people realize that Africa is actually a continent and there are many, many countries in Africa. So you would never make a suggestion that in Europe we're giving all of Europe one mobile app. No, because Germany and Spain would be different, and nobody would even have the audacity to be that patronizing and suggest that one app works for everybody. In Africa that's different, it works for everyone. We also got to this problem of everyone has a phone, in case you didn't know. Actually, not everyone has a phone. Then came the issue of experts. Who is an expert? Is the person who's a professor at a university an expert? Is it the person that comes flown in from New York with great experience, or the person from Zurich, from the World Health Organization? Who actually are the experts? And if you look in Cape Town right now, you just have to go onto Twitter, and there are thousands of experts. Nobody phones them. The mayor hasn't asked them. They're all there. But it's just this thing about the experts. I mean, it is unreal how many solutions we have right now on Twitter. I don't know why nobody is using them. So it's exactly this notion. And then this notion of let's walk in someone else's shoes. Social development. We're going to develop the world, and we're going to all develop it by walking in other people's shoes. Design thinking comes to mind. Let's walk in someone else's shoes. Reality is that's actually not that easy, and there's very often a line between walking in someone else's shoes and being incredibly patronizing. So that's actually a big thing to keep in mind. As I said, we developed apps. We developed a lot of apps. We developed apps for Cambodia. We developed apps for every part of South Africa. I think we've worked the Eastern Cape flat, and if I can just say for a moment, the Eastern Cape is a phenomenal province because they'll allow any academic to come in there. They get over-researched till they fall over, and that's not an easy job. Try that in Cape Town. People don't want to be researched. If you ring somebody's doorbell and say, we're from UCT, we would like to find out how you behave in a water context, they say, thank you very much, no. So a big hi to the Eastern Cape for all the work they've done with us. We went to Cambodia, we went to Vietnam. We realized, for example, that mobile applications, when you speak Khmer, is quite a challenge because nobody has developed the JavaScript for Khmer. So try and develop an app for a language that nobody has thought of. We realized that people are very different. The experts were actually the local people because they knew how they managed water. So in actual fact, it wasn't important what degrees you had. It was only important to realize that the people who managed water that actually survived before we came with our great idea and our Gates dollars, they were the people that would also survive if we just left. So it was a real reality to recognize, perhaps you are more depending on them than they are depending on you. So in Vietnam, we realized, for example, that people love collecting data, and as a German, I was superbly impressed to realize how much data they collected. I have never seen anything like that. And you know what the most amazing thing was? That people collected data when nobody asked them to collect data. Nobody came to look at their books that they had written. Nobody came, but they did it because that was their job. And so when we came and said, but you don't need all this data, let us just, we average out your week. They looked at us and it was like we took their life away. You don't average out. You take data measurements every day, and that's what you do. So don't come with your silly idea from Europe that you're averaging out your pH values. We don't do that here. So it was really interesting to learn these things. And then we went to Mozambique and we dealt with UNICEF, which comes with its own challenges. There it was with children, so it was also different engagement. So all of these environments, as you can see, came with very different politics. So I thought it would be useful to share with you some of our learnings. We definitely learned that the notion of co-design is a very difficult one. So what does it mean to co-design with the community? As I said to you, what does it mean not to be patronizing in this space? Then we this notion of let's scale it. And a lot of entrepreneurs will know this. Let's scale it. We need to scale. We need to have critical mass. Let's scale. Scalability is a really difficult thing. There is not a lot of solutions that actually scale it easy. And we're not talking, when we talk water, we're not talking about a Windows application. We talk about something that is very personal, very differently managed in many countries. Laws are describing how it should be managed, so it's not something where you say, let's just develop one size fits all. One of the things that was interesting, somebody spoke about this, what we forgot, and that might be the mistake of working at a university because we forget a lot of things, the world actually changed whilst we were thinking. And as I think that happens at universities. So the global economy changed, and literally all of the great tools we developed, all of the great technologies we developed, nobody was interested in it anymore. We had developed this for the developing world, and the feedback we got from the big companies like Johnson & Johnson, 3M, all of the great companies that put money into water, said that's a great tool for Canadian campus. And we said, no, that wasn't the idea wasn't to get Canadian campus to test their water resources. We wanted rural people in rural India, in Andhra Pradesh, they should test it. And I said, no, that's a waste of money. We're not interested in investing in that sector because we're not sitting in a global environment where that actually makes sense right now. So that's also a reality. You can have lots of good ideas. If nobody wants to invest in it, then you somewhere missed the boat. And then the other thing was this notion of the phone and the bakkie. So we have one saying the bakkie because South Africans understand what a bakkie is. So I want to tell you a little story. We worked, as I said, a lot in the Eastern Cape. And one of the things that would happen is that we would know that there was bad water quality in a rural village. And we knew that because they sent us the data. But the bakkie was broken. So you couldn't get to the rural village to actually make any difference. You couldn't fix the borehole pump because there wasn't a bakkie to get there. And so the municipal managers would say to us, this is just depressing. You're giving me lots of data. I can't do anything about it. In the end, your data goes to some guy in Pretoria that says, goodness me, these guys in the Eastern Cape, they never do their job. But the reality was the bakkie was broken, which had nothing to do with water. That was a different issue in a different budget. And you heard that in Cape Town as well. It's a different budget. We can't do that because it's a different budget. One of the things that I often speak about in this context is this quote, which is subscribed to Henry Ford. I don't know if it was actually him, but it's this notion of, if I would have asked them what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. So we often have in the tech space this notion, they don't actually know what they're talking about. So we need to help the people to design the solutions because we know how a computer works, they don't. So if I ask the general public what they want, they might want to say, I want a longer shower, or I want to have safe water, or whatever it is. So we often have this attitude of saying, we will provide you with something. Sometimes that's the reality. If you look at the Steve Jobs of this world, they came up with great solutions that a lot of us couldn't have thought of. But sometimes the question is also, is a faster horse a good solution? Does everybody have to have a car? Or is perhaps sometimes pen and paper quite a good technology? And what does the city of Cape Town need? Is it high tech or is it actually quite low tech, and a faster horse might be right now the really best idea we have? And I wanted to just show you these pictures because as we said, this is not something we forgot. This is 2009, the toilet rules. I don't know if you remember. So people are saying, we haven't been there. We have been there. We have been. And they, and you can see here, this is the toilet. I don't know if you all saw. This was what happened in 2009. We went to the High Court. We had the same political party in power. We had the same people in power. Just that it didn't hit us because we were sitting in the lovely suburbs and didn't actually hear about that. In the judgment, and have a look at it because it's really useful in this context. In the judgment, what was pointed out was that the municipal managers spoke about the loo with a view, and they referred to this. And this was the most insulting thing. So what we then did, and I'm not talking about we as us, as me and my team, but what the city did as a response was create a fault reporting system to a situation that looked like this. The fault reporting situation was, we do it via the internet, because everyone has a phone, right? We do it by using the cell phones, and people can use their cell phones to log a call to tell us when their toilets are not satisfactory. They can tell us using their phone that they have a problem. The reality was they didn't want to use their data for it. Why would I use my data package to tell you that the basic service you provided, we're meant to provide me with, isn't there? So there was then the outcome was that, and I think the good news was that we have an answer for you. We can tell you right now that technology will not be a solution for social problems, and I think that's an important finding. Technology is very good, but if you use a cell phone to solve a sanitation crisis, you will have protests, and that will be what's in your face. And I think that's an important message to take home. We did more, because we don't give up. We do believe still, I'm an engineer, so I do believe in intervention. I'm not, where's the social anthropologist? There, so I'm the opposite. I'm an interventionist. He observes, I do, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad, so we make lots of mistakes. But what's interesting, we developed mobile phone technology to change people's behavior. We work with the Department of Economics at UCT that learns and knows a lot about social nudges. So for example, for some people, if you were to increase the water tariff right now in Cape Town by 800%, it wouldn't actually matter. They have so much money, they have water, their roses, whatever we do. But they might react if we say to their little child that comes from a great school, look here, your mother is actually wasting water. That child goes home and says, Mom, we need to save water. And then they will actually change behavior. So we need to look at what nudges work for people. So we developed an application to do some more of that, and we learned more. We learned more that people download a lot of apps, but they don't necessarily use them. Most of us have date apps on our phones that we downloaded once, we used them twice, and then they were boring and we didn't use them any longer. So mobile apps might have a lifespan, but not a very long one. And then the other finding was our app still can't make it rain. So there's that much saving we can do, but then the question is what happens if there's no rain this winter? And that might actually happen. That's not an unrealistic expectation. So sometimes I think what's important in this space is that we actually do know a lot less than we think, which is not what you think when you read the Twitter feeds. When you read the Twitter feeds, you think we actually know a lot. Helping government is also quite a challenging thing, because that's a question of who's the government and then who are the experts, and we get back to the situation. Sometimes it's also a question, what is our intention? Do we want everybody else to change? And why do we want that? And what is also our power? So in the context of universities, the question of power is often, I walk into a room and we say, oh, I'm a professor, and then there's immediately a certain image. If you go and you say, I'm a mayor, there's immediately a certain image. What does that actually mean? And what do we do with that? One of the things that I think we have not done well is engagement. We have not been good at engaging, and we have not been good at identifying who our beneficiaries are. And I think that's a different thing. We talk about stakeholders, but you need to actually distinguish between your clients, between your users, and between the people who benefit. And then listening is actually part of our work. So for anybody who develops any apps, who does any technology development, who does anything, listening is your greatest skill, and it's sometimes quite difficult, and I'm saying that as somebody who mainly talks. So, as a final, my most beloved saying in the world is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think this is a very important saying to keep in this space, specifically in the space we want to, in the context of development. We need to be aware of the unintended consequences of the work we do. Sometimes the wicked problems we talk about in the design space, they're actually quite scary. They're not wicked at all. They have lost the wickedness. And sometimes the good idea is actually just you having a good idea, trying to find a problem out there, the way a good idea fits, and that might not be what the world is looking for. Thank you.
Between politicians and academics, you have a problem with keeping time. But Prof, I'll tell you something. We hosted an ecosystem leaders dialogue about 2 weeks ago. A lot of what you discussed, you'd have been proud to know that people are looking at solutions. So even there are people in this tech ecosystem who are committed to providing free, data-free platforms so that everybody can afford. You can build on top of those platforms. So if you're looking for that information, George has got all of those contacts and all those resources that have been committed to a collective community effort. Tim Harris, you're a former politician. Can you do 10 minutes? Easy. Okay, let's try.
Thank you. Right, so let me start. That was a great start. Yeah. That's called good luck, right? So let me say, break your leg. Can we put that together? Let me start by dropping the clicker. Not the mic. I'll drop the mic at the end. So let me start by thanking the prof, thanking Thomas, JP, Max, George. I think what I wanted to talk about tonight is the concept of change and dealing with change. And I think you've all really emphasized the last change that I wanted to get into. I'm going to end with that. But let me start by taking you back 6 weeks to the 18th of January. So I am the CEO of Westro. I run this agency. I've been doing that for 3 years. And up until the 18th of January, it was a pretty easy job. So what we do is we promote the Cape as an investment destination, as a destination for tourists, as a destination to source product from if you're a buyer. We do tourism, trade, and investment promotion. We do it on behalf of the City of Cape Town and the province of the Western Cape. So we work on behalf of Lance and the team in the city, and we sit alongside a kind of network of agencies and entities like Jody works for at the EDP and the other agencies that are kind of like the interface between government and business. We're out there promoting this extraordinary part of the world. And it's a pretty easy job to do, right? I mean, if you just look out to your left over there, this space we were in now, 30 years ago, was just a dirty dock. It's now part of what is the most successful tourist attraction on the African continent. And Cape Town's been through this incredible transformation to achieve this place at the top of the tourism tables, top of investments, top of exports, top business tourism destination on the continent. It's been an extraordinary run of success in the last few years in the economy and in tourism. And up until the 18th of January, I had black hair. What? Did I get the clicker? Because on the 18th of January, there was a press conference, thank you, where the statement "beyond the point of no return" was used. And that was used in the context of the drought. It was used in the context of us getting to the point where we could no longer avoid the scenario that was called Day Zero. And when you're out there promoting investments, exports, and tourism, this is pretty much the worst thing that you can tell to investors, to buyers, and to tourists. But the good thing is we're kind of used to change in South Africa, right? So we've got our new president running on the prom with Trevor Manuel, but he's also voting in favor of expropriating land without compensation. We heard a few nights ago, Nhlanhla Nene is finance minister again, but then Malusi Gigaba is home affairs minister. We heard the Guptas are fugitives from justice, but then we heard Vatsibile Dlamini is back in the carpet. So South Africa is always about these contrasts, about these changes, and about how tough South Africans are in navigating those changes and making sure that we always come out slightly stronger, slightly more optimistic, and slightly more resilient. And that is exactly what's happened over the past 6 weeks. It's not meant to be. The past 6 weeks since the 18th of January. It's exactly 6 weeks ago today. We hit that first change. It threw a question mark over everything we were doing in Westgrove, and I know there's a lot of people in the room for whom it's immediately undermined everything they were doing. I know Lance also has been in the trenches, Jody as well from the DP, and the Westgrove team at the back. Because this is what people were used to, right? We're used to having lots of water. We had these rain-fed dams. Every year the rains came, and they refilled the dams, and we had enough water for our needs. But then all of a sudden, the international press was running two photos. The one photo was everybody queuing with their containers at the Newlands Spring. The other one is this one, the Turbotterskloof Dam, and this incredible dropping off in the dam levels to crisis levels. It's actually even lower now, 25, right, Lance? 25% across the dam. But I actually like starting with this photo because what I want to tell you about is the story behind the panicky headline. I mean, Day Zero is a super compelling headline, right? It's the first major city in the world to potentially run out of water. But actually, the reason why that dam looks like it, the big reason is it hasn't rained enough. The other reason is that the city water engineers have managed the level of the Turbotterskloof Dam because it's got by far the highest evaporation rates of all of the dams in the network. So what the story tells is actually perhaps a more interesting story of good water management. They've taken the water, they've really hit the Turbotterskloof Dam, and they're managing that water in other systems and in other dams to minimize evaporation. So it's a shocking story, but behind that simple story is a story of competence. And I can tell you I've worked in the public sector for 13 years now. The water engineers in the city are some of the best public servants that I've worked with. They are literally world-class expertise at managing a water system. But they're managing a water system in crisis. Like many more around the world, we've been talking to the folk in Brazil, in California, in Queensland, in Spain, about the historic droughts that they've been through. We're not the first high-growth tourist destination to go through a drought like this. We got on a call with Visit California a few days ago. We ran through with them everything that they did to respond to their drought, And it turns out we were doing exactly what they did. Essentially, we've developed a best practice between these regions around the world to cope with these catastrophic droughts. And it really is catastrophic. So 2 years of drought, 2015, 2016, followed by the worst year of rainfall in recorded history for the Western Cape system. The UCT scientists said it's a 1 in 1,000 chance of having such bad rainfall after 2 years of drought. That was last year, 30% of the average for Cape Town, and it really threw the whole system into crisis, because this is what the system looks like. It's 6 rain-fed dams. The only feed-in is from rain. We lose some to evaporation. 64% of that water comes to Cape Town. 7% goes to towns like Stellenbosch and Drakenstein, Paarl around Cape Town, and 29% goes to agriculture. And the city decided a few months ago that what we needed here was a response from ordinary Cape Townians to reduce consumption so that we can get through the teeth of this drought, so that we can get through this year. So that day zero model, it's been highly controversial and highly traumatic for those of us that promote the economy and the tourist economy in particular in the Cape. But what happened is that model started linking the individual decisions that you make at home, Cape Townians make at home, with the outcome. If we save water, we can avoid this situation. That was the logic behind the model. The good news is it was very conservative. It assumed that 29% that is allocated to agriculture, that the city had no control over it, therefore we need to assume that we can't control it. The good news is agriculture started complying with their limits. It's been absolutely devastating in that space. I do not want to overstate or understate that rather. We've lost tens of thousands of jobs in agriculture. It's going to take us a long time to recover. But essentially, the day zero model has pushed out as dramatically as it has up to around the middle of July, because agriculture has started cutting their drawdown from the system. And that's really thrown us a lifeline here in the city. So whenever I present these slides, you always have to stop and give credit to the farmers who not only have cut their consumption, but as you'll see in a little while, are also transferring water into the system to help us out here in the city. But it is an incredibly well-run system. The dotted line is the population growth in Cape Town. The blue line shows the amounts of water we use. Over the past 20 years, there have been massive improvements in efficiency. This is a system that's now run at developed world levels in a developing world situation. We've got engineered a massive reduction in burst water mains. I'll say it again, those water engineers running the system are operating at a world-class level. They run a super well-managed system. Who's using that water? You heard the number earlier. It's about 70% residential, with about 65% of that in formal housing, formal neighborhoods and flats, 5% in informal settlements. And this again underlines the point of that Day Zero campaign. The individual choices that we make at home as residents of Cape Town influences our ability to get through the short-term elements of the drought. If you can reduce your consumption, as we all have, then we can get through it. And this is the reduction that we was asked for. So the top slide shows the normal year. Blue section at the top is what's given to agriculture. The green in the middle is reserved for the city, and orange is the evaporation that we lose from the dams. And we were asked to restrict this consumption pattern down to here. You see just how heavy those cuts were. And the good news is that Day Zero date has continued to shift up, making sure that we just missed that 13.5% level of the dams, and making me extremely confident that we will this year not hit a Day Zero scenario, which means the taps will stay open. That is an incredibly important point for us to make to ordinary Cape Townians, because that has become possible by a historic gain in the way we use water. We've essentially totally changed our consumption patterns. I think we hit 516, right?
Is that dependent on rain falling, or is that just your projection?
That's dependent on rain falling at the worst rainfall we've ever had, which is 30% of our normal average. So that's based on the worst scenario we've ever experienced. But our consumption is now today dramatically less than half of the water we used as a city 3 years ago. There's no other city in the world that's ever done that. We've been looking at the comparisons now for a few weeks. We cannot find a city that's reduced its consumption so dramatically. So this story is a reality because of all of the contributions that you have made, all of the technologies that you've developed to dramatically reduce our consumption of water. On an individual level, it plays out even more dramatically, but I'll show that in a second. Of course, that's not enough. We need to cut our consumption to get through the drought. But ultimately, Cape Town needs to make this transition. A few years ago, 100% of our water came from rain that was gathered in dams. This year, 12% of our water that we use as a city will come from alternative sources. And this is the plan, leading up to December next year, to diversify those sources. Essentially, the city will move from being entirely dependent on rain-fed dams to being dependent on those dams. We'll always require rain-fed water in Cape Town. It will be one of the main pillars of our water system. But we've got these transfers coming in from farmers, from the other water systems around the Cape. That's really helping us out in this crunch time. And what you can see over time, the groundwater abstraction. This is the aquifers that we're tapping into. The boreholes the city's drilling to tap into the aquifers under the city. The sandy aquifers are under the Cape Flats. The orange is the Table Mountain group of aquifers, and they're really going to take us through this period of crisis. At the same time, the city's adding more and more water reclamation technology and tapping into some of those springs running off the mountain. This is the picture of diversifying water sources, of augmenting our water supplies. It's going to get us through the teeth of this crisis, and it's going to kick off a massive diversification of our water reliance on rain-fed dams into a wide range of sources of water, which is best practice in terms of water management systems. It's the future for Cape Town, and it's a future that our competent water engineers and the folk in the city sitting around Lance are busy making reality. This was planned over decades. 2022, I think, was the next major augmentation plan. The historic drought, unpredicted, kicked in, and all of a sudden we had to make this transition in an incredibly short space of time. That's the trauma, that's the crisis, that's what we've had to manage over the last 6 weeks. But I'm confident that what you've seen today is the beginning of the next change. The change from the story of, well, what if they turn all the taps off, how are we going to get our water, to the story of building one of the most resilient cities on earth. One of the things we've done to try and keep a positive message out in the international community is engage with lots of international media. I was talking to Joseph Cottrell from the Financial Times, and I said the most interesting thing about your coverage for me is you say Cape Town's the first city in the developed world that could run out of water. I said we've never been described as a developed world city. We're an emerging market city. We're a developing market city. And he said, yeah, that's true, but there's cities in the developing world that run out of water every day, and it doesn't make the Financial Times. If Cape Town runs out of water, it's front page news on every paper in the world. And he said, that's because you are held to a developed world standard. You're dependent on a developing world fiscus, developing world tax base. We've got developing world levels of inequality and unemployment, but we're held to the standard of the developed world. And I think, in a way, I take some hope from that. It describes Cape Town, right? It's this incredible diversity we have in the city. This expectation that when people come here, they're going to get the best customer service in the world, they're going to have the best tourism experiences in the world. But actually, we know that we've got deep, deep challenges, and we're working together to overcome them in an incredibly diverse and set of mixed experiences that we have here in the city. I think the FT describing us as a developed world city is a fascinating expose of that reality of life here in Cape Town. So you might be wondering, why don't you just build a kind of Dubai-style monstrous desalination plant? The bottom line is this stuff is really expensive. Augmentation is expensive. If you read the Constitution like I have, you'll see that bulk water supply is meant to be provided by the National Department of Water and Sanitation. The National Department's view is that Cape Townians need to use less water. I think I disagree with them, but nevertheless the city is going down a very expensive road of diversifying our water sources. You can see, for example, we talk about 500 million litres of augmentation relative to what we actually get from rainfall every year. You can see why I say rainfall is going to remain a central pillar of the water system in the Cape. So what is the city doing beyond that augmentation? There's a lot of water consumption reduction strategies. We know we're down to that 50 litres per day limit. They've dramatically increased the price of water, particularly for heavy users. They're reducing the pressure in the system, so you're going to get less water out of your tap to help reduce demand. They've implemented, or rather installed, almost 250,000 water management devices. So if your household's using more than 10,500 litres of water a day, they're going to slap one of these devices on your system and restrict you to a more reasonable amount of water. On the supply side, there's that diversification is happening, taking us up to 12% for this year from the aquifers that can deliver 150 million litres a day, and actually go much higher if they need to in the short term. But remember, the aquifer strategy is a short-term strategy. You hit those aquifers, you take that water, then when the rains come, you replace it. You have to recharge your aquifers, and the city has a strong plan to do that. 16 million litres a day from desalination, 60 million litres a day from water transfers from those farmers in Elgin and others, 10 million from water reuse, and 4 million litres a day from the springs. This is all happening in the context of this historic reduction at personal level. These are draft figures. We're busy working out what the actual state of play is, comparing us to other cities. But the initial work says we're getting close to that 50 litres per day restriction by the city. When Melbourne went through this draft, they got down to 250 million litres per day. California was even worse. Sao Paulo came slightly closer, but really no other city in the world has reduced consumption on an individual level like we've done in Cape Town. If you want to know why we're getting through this, it's because of the decisions everybody in this room and the rest of us as residents here in Cape Town are taking. Almost finished. We need to make sure that the story gets out to the rest of the world. We need to make sure that tourism remains a dynamic sector of our economy. It supports 300,000 jobs. So we're telling tourists the story is mixed. You could be in Hermanus, there's very little water restrictions to speak of. You can be in the Garden, the same thing. This is centered in Cape Town and one or two other municipalities. There's a different story in the rest of the Western Cape Province. Plus, those tourists bring such benefits to our region, but they make up an incredibly small number of the water-using population at any one time. 1% of our population in Cape Town is made up of tourists on your average day. You increase, sorry, that's international tourists. You add domestic tourists, it goes up to 2.4%. That very small number of water users is adding a huge amount to our economy. And this is an important message to get to tourists who said, well, actually, I don't want to come to Cape Town and make the situation worse. It's an ethical question. So we got on a roadshow with South African tourism and went out to the US, to Europe, to tell the story, to say we are open for tourism. You need to please come to Cape Town, but when you're here, be mindful of our situation. We've created a water comm centre at Westgrove, 15 staff, supported by Cape Town Tourism, supported by Silver Sun. They're managing a website, waterwesterncape.co.za, that is the single landing point for the tourism trade. It's got all of the questions that tourists might ask. It's got all of the forward booking data. It's got all of the information that we're providing to tourists to say that they need to come, they need to help support this economy, and when they're here, they need to be mindful of the situation. So what you have in your chairs is two documents. There's the folder, which is everything we used to talk about until the 18th of July. It's the positive momentum message about the Cape economy. Inside that is 5 pages of everything you've ever wanted to know about the water situation in Cape Town. I challenge you to find a question for the city of Cape Town that isn't answered in that 5-page water article. I know Lance is coming up here in a second on the panel in case you do have a question like that. But really, this is the new normal. It's not about hitting 50 litres per person every day for the rest of our lives. It's about building a resilient city that in an emerging market context can provide a developed world level of service delivery, can cope with unpredicted, unexpected challenges like climate change. The model we've developed here in Cape Town will be replicated around the rest of the world where climate change hits other cities. People are going to be talking about the Cape Town model, and it's because of the efforts that all of us have made together with tourists, together with business, to get us through this crisis and build the most resilient city on earth. Thank you very much.
I'm starting to realize that, you know what, this topic is one of those topics to me that we should, it's like, I don't know, you should have had a half-day lecture. Because primarily it's so important and so critical to our collective kind of existence that, you know, it's important that we allow every speaker the opportunity to share everything that they need to talk about.
I want to hear a little bit from Philip and Prof now. A couple of the presentations have presented this idea of this isn't a crisis, a new crisis for the whole of Cape Town. It's a new crisis for a part of Cape Town and a very old crisis for the rest of Cape Town. And I know, Philip, you've been traveling a bit and experiencing scarcity in other contexts. And I want to hear a little bit from both of you of how do we transition through this crisis in a way that not just helps the middle class save less and kind of protect the city's existing 11,000 kilometers of infrastructure, but actually start to also introduce access to water and sanitation and health for those who have always had a kind of a day zero scenario.
Cool, thanks. Just to start out, I mean, it was it's very inspiring to see some of the speakers. I mean, especially hearing Tim talk about how amazing Cape Town is doing in a global context. Really sets a standard and gives us something to be proud about. But at the same time, I'm gonna throw out a really depressing statistic for you, and that is when you look at the global population increase. So over the next 80 years, the population of Africa is expected to increase by 3.5 billion people. That's almost a 4 times increase over what we are dealing with today. And then you add to that an urbanization trend, which is people are moving from rural areas into the cities. And many of the cities in Africa are going to increase by 5, 6, or 8 times. So for all of the amazing water savings we're doing in Cape Town now, you double the population, you triple it, you quadruple it, it's all for naught. So everything that we are doing today is not enough. And anything we can imagine today is not enough. So that is the solutions that are going to get us for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years are fundamentally different than anything we've imagined to date. And that is a textbook definition of disruption. And so in my day job, what I do is with Startup Bootcamp, we are out seeking the disruptive solutions of the future. Now, typically we're looking at tech-enabled things, which are digital money, cryptocurrency, cool stuff like that, fintech and insurtech. But increasingly, we're now also looking at things that are core to life itself. So agriculture tech, water tech, city, municipal. And so as inspired as I am about where we've gotten to in this crisis, the reality is that we cannot take our foot off the pedal, right? We have to do, we need to do 10x, 20x more than what we've done to date. And that is, it's depressing, but it's also an amazing opportunity. So when we think about, where are the solutions of the future coming from? Tim was showing those statistics. What they've done in California, in Silicon Valley, the heart of innovation of the globe. They only got down to 300 liters per person. We're down to 50 liters a person. So the innovations that are going to solve the crisis are going to come from here in Africa, where we confront scarcity every single day. And what's really amazing, if you think about that, is that if and when we come up with those solutions, we then become the innovation core for the future. We now get to export those solutions to all the other places in the world that are going to come after this and deal with those same sets of crises. Because they're not dealing with it at the level we are, and they don't have the mindset and the outlook, and also they don't have the desperation that we do. So out of that comes an incredible opportunity, and that's really what inspires me every day to be doing what we're doing.
You want to respond to that? No, I will hold.
Yeah, so from my side, it's just as I said, I don't think it's a new crisis. I think it's a crisis that has met some of the people in Cape Town now for the first time. I think it's also quite important to look at the technology, so that we talk a lot about desalination, all of these different fantastic technologies. I think what's really important to recognize is that we had the wettest January. We had the wettest January in a long time in Cape Town. We have had a lot of rainfall in January. it's quite weird to think that there have been drier Januaries. So if you go back and you do all your climatology, you're all becoming climatologists in case you didn't realize. You're all going back to all these months. But what I found really interesting is we have enough rainwater fall in Cape Town to actually feed the whole city. We're just not at the moment in a position to actually catch the rainwater well enough and to actually store it well enough. So there's a lot of thinking we have to do, and that's sometimes why you also can't say, oh, let's use what they use in Israel, or let's use what they use in Germany, or what they do in California. It actually sometimes isn't relevant. So I think the challenge comes to rely on you to make your own standard. And that's not something we like. We like ISO 9000 because everybody's using it. So doing our own thing is quite an insecure situation. And I think that's also, and I would really also wanted to reiterate, I've worked a lot now with the Department of Water Affairs in the city of Cape Town, and they are doing an amazing job. And if anybody says they should be fired because of whatever, actually then people haven't done their homework. And I want to just put that out there on Twitter, that in actual fact they are this. And I'm saying that as an academic.
Thank you. So I think I'm almost hearing a little bit of a slightly different paradigm shift here. On the one hand, we talk about scarcity, but on the other hand, saying actually no, we've had a lot of rain, so there is an abundance. It's available. We're just not able to really capture it and distribute it. So how do we deal with that when we now start to talk about scale and scaling up solutions, but scaling up solutions that deal with resources that are all around us?
Okay, I think one of the most amazing things about being able to take a global water journey around the world is being able to see, so we started the water journey in Las Vegas, and Vegas has a mother of a water footprint. They are, they have Bellagio fountains, they've got people who are on golf courses, but what they did have is the advantage of somebody called Pat Mulroy, who headed up the South Nevada Water Administration, and she's now at Brookings, and just somebody who was incredibly determined from the early 90s in being able to do a lot of projects around being able to look at the management of water, not just how we use it, but also just increasingly getting the lawn buybacks. But one of the most exciting things that I saw was just in China. And I think with Philip, one of the things that I think is amazing about innovation is just our ability to copy, right, as humans. And Xi Jinping has a very clear, beautiful China program. For them, their desperation is toxic rivers, toxic cancer villages, where their rivers are so toxic that nobody can drink that water. So being able to share with each other, we are a human family, and being able to learn from each other what is working.
Yeah, I think also, the kind of new paradigm that is coming up, I saw it also in the energy crisis too, and I think it's certainly going to start to play out now in the water crisis, is this issue of that it's not just about centralized provision of energy or centralized provision of water. And I think that while I've had to try and become an expert on the water system as a whole, I think we've all had to become experts on the water flowing through our houses. And I think we've all got a greater understanding now of how water actually kind of finds itself into different areas and how it actually pertains to every aspect of our lives. But so I think that what we're going to be seeing is that, certainly the city's going to try and respond with a kind of big centralized solution, and I think that it needs to look at that, and I think that needs to be on the plans. But at the same time, what I would love to see is actually the citizens themselves, businesses, private sector, communities, all of that coming through and saying, actually, we have a part of the solution as well. How do we actually decentralize this? How do we build water resilience by putting up more rainwater harvesting? How do we look at more grey water tanks? All of those kinds of things. And so the city can then possibly create a policy environment through the new water bylaw and through certain financial incentives and by increasing the price of water so that actually it pays off to make those investments. So I think you're going to see it kind of moving from a more centralized distribution where you just worry about the city providing it to actually we're going to take some control of this ourselves. And I think that's an important shift that needs to happen.
Philip definitely wants to respond.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's really amazing. When when we're out across Africa and we're looking at these scarcity solutions, it's exactly that, right? The innovation is a bottom up, right? So there's an unbelievable role that government can play, but private industry and private individuals and innovators, are really the future.
And private equity as well.
And the funding to support those. So one of the things that you want to say on the water side, is that the conversation keeps coming around, where can we get more, or how can we use less? But the fundamental thing that has to change is the reuse of the water, right? So if you think about the analogy, I'm American, you'll tell from the accent, we spent 120 years running copper cables so that we could connect every single home and business and street corner via phone lines. And then the mobile technology came along, and when you go around Africa, no one's thinking, hey, let's go and run copper cables everywhere. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. I look at water in the same way. It's like water flows from these remote dams to our geyser, to use the shower loop or the tiny loop as an illustration, to a geyser. It spends all of about a half a second or a full second flowing down, and then then it pipes out another dozen or 100 kilometers out to some treatment plant where it's brought up to close to potable standards and then sent out into the ocean, right? Anybody looking at that system would say that doesn't really make sense, right? So what's cool about Tiny Loop, and just full disclosure, I'm actually involved in that project. But what's very cool about the concept of it is that it's fundamentally rethinking, like, why should we use all this new water and then send it away? Let's look at ways that we can reuse it, and if you apply that across an entire home or a small cluster of homes and communities, then you move from kind of the centralized approach that was discussed before to kind of a tiny clusters and pods and very independent. And in the same way that cell phones are much more resilient than big landline infrastructures, these tiny little clusters around water are going to be much more resistant and much more efficient than big municipal infrastructures. So that's the thing that we're looking for is innovations around that think of different ways to reutilize water. And the other piece I want to say is that, unfortunately, I find myself very cynical about consumers and citizens' willingness and abilities to make the fundamental changes. So everybody pulled together in an amazing way this year. The biggest concern I have is that if we don't hit day zero, that everybody next year is going to say, see, that was all just a big hoax. And that water consumption is going to spike back up. We cannot rely on individuals making good decisions enough to save us next year, the year after that, and 10 years from now. So the homes have to become smarter than individuals. We have to really, in many ways, extract the decision making so that the shower itself or the washing machines or the various water consuming devices in homes are smart enough that irrespective of individual education and selfishness, that the devices in the homes are smart enough to overcome that and to work from a society perspective.
Not just how we eat, Philip, because we are just crazy water consumption machines. And with the Australians, they've shaped they've shaped a lot of their they've done behavioral economic nudges around getting, bizarrely enough, rice either likes lots of water or drought conditions. So finding the kind of crops that suit our conditions and tweaking, because the time of easy water is done. And being smart and shaping, getting chefs in who really shape our tastes as well. Because, choosing water expensive crops and cows and that kind of thing makes a big difference to the land as well.
So you can see she works in sustainable development goals because she's immediately going to the nexus. Which is great. No, but that's exactly what it's about. It's not just about what we heard from Westgrow, that there's damage to the agricultural sector, but there's opportunity as well to find these tech solutions and deal with that nexus of energy, water, food, waste, and all of that. There's a lot of people sitting here so diligently and quietly, so I'm actually going to get some questions from the audience. I'll take 3 at a time and we'll see how we do for time. You're welcome to share an idea of your own. We'll also be limited to time. Or you're welcome to pose a general question or a question to any one of the panelists.
We'll just take them 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, okay. 1, 2, 3 at the back, sure.
Maybe I should just full disclosure, I run a water and energy research company and a blockchain research company as well in Berlin. And we have a solution, a water harvester solution. So just full disclosure there. There are a few things I just noticed some of the things you guys were saying. I mean, about how well Cape Town is doing, 50 litres or less. Now, I don't know whether you know it or not, but that's a completely false figure, because you've got a few million people out there using much less. So in the developed part of Cape Town, you're using probably just as much as California. I think you must be honest about that. The second thing is Cape Town's doing extremely well, but the people who suffered from the agricultural water coming in have been workers who've lost their jobs. Yeah. So once again, you've got, and I've come back to an article that was written by some researcher on the Washington Post. While the rich drill boreholes and install rain tanks, the poor worry about where the next meal comes from. And I think just my criticism of this entire water tech day, I haven't heard anything about that. I haven't heard anything about IoT solutions, Internet of Things. I haven't heard anything about low power, Wi-Fi enabled solutions. I haven't heard anything about blockchain solutions, managing water. I haven't heard anything about photovoltaic. So I came here expecting something very, very much more different. And maybe I'm quite passionate about the subject because I'm from Cape Town originally, and I get the idea of two cities, one wealthy and white, where everything's going rosy and everyone's doing fine. And I was in Guguletu and Khayelitsha a few days ago, and things are not so rosy and fine. So, I mean, for me, it's something like a schizophrenia happening here, and I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for your question now. In fact, ironically, I think somebody I want to give you that question to maybe respond how the community can probably respond better as well. But we have done a bunch more of that stuff, not in this forum, but in other forums. So.
Yeah, so this wasn't planned, I was asking a question after you. But I was actually part of the speaker lineup, and there were a bit of miscommunications, and it was off the agenda. Not Nancy's fault, I was late to the presentation. But just to respond, like part of the session today was to include a project which I'm involved with the informal settlements of Lara, and we've got a grey water and solid waste solution there. So just to bring awareness that the people that pulled this event together, there is a conscious effort to try and get, from my understanding, this sort of diverse input, and just something from people I know around in this room has some common places. It's something that people are conscious about. So I think just be aware, unfortunately couldn't come through with big old presentation, but there's definitely people in this room who are acutely aware of these challenges. So what I want to mention was more an observation and kind of posing more to the kind of tech community. So I've been for the last 5 or so years involved on the ground, in the informal settlement space. But what I've definitely picked up is there's an amazing wealth of knowledge and information with individuals who are largely in like these sort of fringe sort of sectors, whether it's permaculture or like a lot of people term it like hippies, because I don't even use them. But the reality is like the world is going into this new era. And I've seen it over the last 5 years. You've seen some of these technologies or ideas bursting out into the mainstream. And my suggestion is, if you are coming from a business technology background, what is often missing in this other space is the ability to put a business model together and actually commercialize it. There's an amazing wealth of information and knowledge in these individuals and communities, and I think bridging what's in this room in the technology and entrepreneurial space with these individuals who have been doing this for decades, I think there's something magical to be had there.
Again, these conversations have been hosted, Justin, you know that. And maybe George didn't cover enough of the stuff that's been spoken about in previous other sessions, but we are working on these solutions. Is there a question down there?
Another question. I'm from Pickup Technologies, Uber equivalent to the courier industry. I just want to throw it out there that They all know you have to queue in supermarkets or moving streets for water. Pickup is delivering water to your doorstep at cost price from the vehicle.
You're not going to find you, eh?
You have to pay for drinks. Don't be entrepreneurial here on my watch, okay? Don't start here. I'll punish you. So really, just a quick response on just generally, what can we do more as a community to kind of drive more inclusion, more direct solutions, etc., etc.?
Well, it kind of feels like I'm not even going to answer your question, but to me, I mean, I would actually throw that back at the community. And I think to your point around, you know, there are so many more stories that aren't being told. There's so much that we're not really having dialogues about yet, but the stuff is happening, and it's probably happening in pockets throughout the Western Cape. So I think maybe we should, as a community or as an ecosystem, put a challenge out there to say to each other, okay, well, let's start talking about this. So maybe host something like a full day that is dedicated to looking at, for example, the tech, and have a blockchain stream looking at what is happening around, you know, in the water space. So I throw the question out to the community and say, well, why don't you put ideas forward in terms of how you want to continue these conversations, and what are the things that you really want to hear about? So that would be my answer. And you're welcome to email me. My email address is sumarie@Silicon Cape. But if you go onto our website and you click on team, our details are there. So please do write to us. We'd love to hear what you think.
Lance, do you want to make an offer to host something?
No, Chief. Sure. Yeah, when we were speaking, I think that's such an important point to make, and I was kind of going, oh, but there's this guy and there's this guy. So I think in the audience you'll probably find there are people who are working in that
Put the
space.
content in the talks.
Yeah.
That
So
might be useful.
I think the organisers may have heard that, but there was other content in the talks that other people might have found valid. So one of the questions that came up here was, how do you deal with more decentralized access? And that was in one of the pitches, actually, to have these shared grey water systems and tanks across low-income communities. So I think it might not be the specific tech you're looking for, but certainly there's others in the room. But I think it raises an important question of how do we go about, as leaders in this space, framing the right problems and getting to the right understanding of the problem, and then coordinating the right responses to that. And I think the people on this panel might have quite different ideas and starting points to that. So, Lance, do you want to?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult issue. I mean, I think it also depends on what you're trying to solve for. So, in terms of this particular water crisis, I mean, as was shown by the graph there, who uses the water in Cape Town at the moment? I mean, it is the affluent suburbs, without a doubt. That is it. It's 70% of the residential. And we did see some of the stuff coming through from some sectors of the population saying, oh no, it's the informal settlements, you need to look there, they're wasting the water. Well, actually they're not. I mean, they only account for 4% of the water usage. So if one's trying to get through this water crisis and drastically reduce your water usage, most of your messaging and most of your technologies are going to have to be aimed at the people that are very high users. So I think that's why there's been a lot of emphasis on the high users. And there is a tale of two cities, without a doubt. I mean, most of the high users are in the more affluent suburbs, without a doubt. I mean, that is what it is. What I have found interesting in this is that, for instance, they talked about the one thing which is the WMDs, which is the weapon of mass destruction, essentially, if you're a high user. That was originally used and is being used in Cape Town for debt management. So poorer households had those WMDs to kind of regulate the flow of water in there so that they could manage their accounts. Now, there was protest against that. What happened in this water crisis, though, very interestingly, it was the rich households, the most rich households, that got those installed by force. And it's been interesting because, in a sense, it's kind of equalized Cape Town to some extent, where actually your water, after you've used your 350 litres for the day, will cut off. It will cut off and you won't have any more water. And I mean, I had the irate phone calls to me saying, oh, something's just been put in my meter here, but I've got no water. What is the story here? I said, what was your bill for the last month? No, it was quite high. We used about 67,000 litres. I said, well, I have absolutely no mercy for you. So it's actually been quite interesting to see how this crisis has actually led to us being able to take action against those high users and actually bring them down to a similar level to what other people are actually having to endure here as well. So it's been interesting, this crisis, and the dynamics that it's brought out around that.
But you are conflating two issues.
Okay,
You're conflating the
sorry.
issue of education for the wealthy and solutions for the poor.
Sure. No, absolutely.
Education people are using too much. That is not a solution. That is just merely one way of dealing with it.
It's not just education.
What would be really
It's not
nice
just
to hear, what are the solutions for the city?
Sure.
And water is not like other tech. Water is not like Uber.
Sure.
Water is not like 23andMe with genetic, get your gene mapped. Water is a basic commodity, and it's not something where solutions can be privatized.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm gonna try and take control of this so it's not a one-way dialogue. There's other people in the room with their hands up. If you want to continue the discussion, I'm sure the organizers from Silicon Cape will hear you and Lance and others. I just want to be fair to others in the room with their hands up.
Hi, I'm sorry. I have a big problem with people proposing tech solutions to solve issues of the poor. I worked in the ICT for DLAB, for Gary Boston, still around. And the solutions that you end up building in these communities end up being things that already exist, but they operate on a much more degraded manner. They're low-cost devices. We reinvent internet for the poor. We reinvent lighting or heat or whatever. These solutions are heavily degraded, where it's a solution that can be simply solved with just a stroke of the pen. It's just legislation. It's just political will. So it really bothers me when innovators step forward and they criticize for not presenting a solution for people who wouldn't be able to afford the solution in any case. So I know it's not a comforting thing to say, but a lot of people are entrepreneurs, and the crisis is an opportunity. And so they're going to be building solutions that not everyone can afford. That's the way it is. It's just, it bothers me when we say, when we don't petition government to solve these issues, which they should be solving on that level.
Again, for lack of repeating myself, there's a lot of engagement around some of these elements, where there's accelerators that are going to be launched in the coming weeks. There's programs and funding initiatives that are going to be launched, crowdfunding initiatives. So I think we're doing quite a great job. It might not form part of this conversation, but we need to figure out how we bring all the conversations to one place. Was there other questions? One more?
Of the session. My name is Zulu. As a national psychologist, there's something that I've learned in the praxis. The speaker, one of the speakers identified it, the issue of needs. In Cape Town, the problem of information is not well received to the people, not because it's false information. It's because there's a lot of myths that are going around in Cape Town, that there's some water stored somewhere, which is possibly true or not, and we do not know. So when we hear about the solutions on how we can get the water, the problem is that we cannot accept information easily because there's still an unanswered question, there's still an unbelieved or an critically visited story of saying there's a bank of water somewhere in the mountain, or saying there's someone who has water somewhere, you see, and saying that there's always something about water being stored, there's all about water being wasted somewhere to the ocean, white people trying to depress the flags. We know our past, we know our differences, but we're South Africa and we're moving forward as a country, and there are people who don't want that. So as a young South African, I believe that as we must push information to the people. Information is the only way that we can get people to believe. But as soon as people understand that this is a crisis of water, because if we can run out of water, we can be in big trouble. And that trouble will run out, all our things to close down, all the hospitals will close down, schools, universities, businesses will shut down. It's not just people not able to drink. I think people focus only on water as a drinking factor. Water is something huge. It promotes hygiene, a lot of things. So I would urge the city or entrepreneurs or anyone who's putting information to make sure that there's a huge amount of information being distributed to the people, so we can kill all these false stories about whatever is happening in Cape Town. Thank you.
We are well over time, Tim, and I just want to give our panelists literally 30 seconds to close up because I feel like we haven't addressed each of these questions. And so the question I'm going to leave each panelist is literally 30 seconds. What's the next conversation you want to have?
Yeah, so I just want to say to the last speaker, I think it's also about trust in government. So one of the things is putting out information, but if people don't trust who's putting the information out, and I think that's actually the greatest challenge for Cape Town right now. Who's putting the information out, and is anybody still believing what we are saying?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, just to say, look, these last 6-7 months have been very, very difficult. Believe me, if there was some water stored somewhere, we would have used it. And this really has been traumatic. Day Zero wasn't a hoax, but what is very good and very encouraging to me is that I feel like we've actually been able to move from a little bit move out of the kind of crisis mode to actually say we're not going to have Day Zero this year, which is great because I've been doing all the planning around it, and believe me, you don't want it. It will be hugely disruptive to Cape Town. And we can move out of that kind of mindset to actually start to have the debates around how do we build a water resilient city, which actually takes into account all of these issues. How do we make sure that water can be provided for all of our needs and for all Cape Townians at an affordable price as well. And that's something which I think all of Cape Town needs to debate, and we need to find consensus over the next few months about what those choices should be. So I think that's going to be a very exciting period going forward.
Definitely. So one of the things that I feel every single one of us knows somebody who's making a choice around careers and being able to work in water, on social justice issues, on all of these components of whether it's recycling, reuse, pollution, just being able to regenerate aquifers, whatever these components are, whether it's blockchain, there are so many components to working in water. The future of work, if you know somebody who wants a long career that can span anywhere in the world, being able to dig down not just hydrology, but all of the components around water, this is an issue of our time. And this is the place to be. Thank you for showing up on a flippin' First Thursday. Thank you to all of you.
Yeah, so just reiterating what I said earlier, I mean, even if we're fortunate enough to escape the Day Zero this year or next year, there's a 100% certainty that we are going to run out of water. So everybody needs to wrap their head around that fact that like this is not a problem that's going to go away with the population increase that's coming to this continent. So the challenges, whether it's this year or the next year or the year after that, are fundamental, and the only way that we are going to survive is if people start thinking about real, tangible, massively scalable solutions that fundamentally shift the way that we source water, consume water, recycle water, and relate to water. And so in the Startup Bootcamp land, just speaking selfishly, what we do better than anybody else is help those people, those innovators that are coming up with those solutions scale and succeed and thrive in a commercially viable and sustainable way as businesses. So if you know companies, I mean the gentleman out there, if you know companies, if you know entrepreneurs, if you know innovators that are thinking about these things across any of those spectrums, sourcing, consuming, recycling, please get in touch with Startup Bootcamp. Among all the other resources, the thing that we can do to help contribute is to find and scale those companies and connect them with large-scale corporations and markets.
Yeah. And can I do sorry, like the last pitch, Jane. So for you who, because looking at blockchain components, if you are working on blockchain and water, Fremantle in Australia is one of the first places that I know that are actually implementing with smart contracts. So if you are, I do observatories and I look for projects for UNESCO, for trend watching, and I'm Max Kaizen. Please look for me. I want to be able to share what your projects are. So, thank you. Thank you for the indulgence.
Yeah, well, thanks again, everybody, for your time. We are 2 minutes from 8 o'clock. Thank you to our panel.